All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in again to BRIC's Free Apprenticeship Speaker Series, where we aim to give you an inside look at the various careers across entertainment, gaming, media, and tech with the help from industry pros themselves. My name is Sarah. I'm BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator for this series. And today we're kicking off the start of this academic year series by exploring the world of production management. And we're doing that with our special guest, Brooke Levine here, who actually started on BRIC's team as an intern many moons ago and has since climbed the ranks to become a production supervisor at Skydance Animation. We're all very proud of her and very excited to hear from her today. You'll hear more about her career journey, about her role in feature animation, and then we'll reserve the last 15 minutes of our session to host a live Q&A. So if you have any questions for Brooke about her career, about production management, about Skydance maybe, definitely use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions you have along the way. And so with that, I'll turn over the presentation to you, Brooke, to take it away.
All right, let me attempt sharing screen. Let's see. Does this work?
Looks great.
Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here, and thank you to the BRIC Foundation for having me. Like Sarah said, my name is Brooke, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on production management, and we'll leave room for questions at the end. And I'm also going to have a few interactive bits. So if you are able to pull up another browser on your computer or take out your phone, you'll see in a few minutes. That would be awesome. And with that, I will get into a bit of my background. So I went into college not really knowing what I actually wanted to do, and I attended Occidental College, which is a liberal arts school, and I went in with a super open mind. Believe it or not, I actually thought I was going to go pre-med, and then I ended up doing quite literally the most opposite thing possible, which is working in animation. And I took one biology class, knew it wasn't for me, and was always really interested in child development and worked at the preschool on campus. But I felt that wasn't creative enough for me. And one thing led to another. And I ended up taking a course in critical theory and social justice called From Mother Goose to Mashups that really stuck with me. It was a class where we looked at different children's media through critical theory lenses, and I realized that I can combine all of my interests into one career, which was animation. And from there, I studied media arts and culture, which is my school's version of being a film major. And I got to make a couple of live action short films, but I also got to learn basic 2D animation, which I really fell in love with. But I'm not the strongest artist, so I was worried that I couldn't get a career in animation. And I had no idea what production was at the time. And so I tried out a few different things, and I did a development internship at a place called Kerner Entertainment, where I read lots of scripts and did script coverage, which is where you kind of write a mini essay and talk about if you would recommend the script you read or not. And I also did an internship for a documentary studio and helped do some archival research, which I learned that was not my thing either. And then I got a really cool opportunity to work with one of my professors at the Geena Davis Institute on gender and media. And I got to work on my professor's research team and learn a ton about representation of different groups in media and how it affects the viewers. And they do really cool work over there. So it really solidified my love for film and made me want to make a change in the industry. And then I found something called BRIC, and I applied for quite a few different animation internships and never got selected. And I started to lose hope that I would never actually get to work in animation because of my lack in technical skills. But I finally discovered the BRIC Summit and volunteered and met some really incredible like-minded peers who were going through the same things as me, which was a relief. And I also got to meet people in the industry who later helped me out. And I met someone very important who was able to guide me in the right direction, BRIC's very own Allison Mann. And I can't emphasize how important it is to have a mentor to help you out when you're starting out. And honestly, anywhere in your career journey never hurts. And from there, I also got to help out with the Creative Academy and produced a short series called I Get Paid for This, which is a great resource to find out about like what types of jobs are available in the animation industry and just learn where your skills can align because there are so many different jobs in this industry. And then after about 50 different interviews at different places, yes, you heard that right, I finally landed my job at Skydance. And I genuinely only thought I can be in development with the skills I had since I wasn't technical. But after interviewing a few times and not getting the job, the recruiter suggested to apply as a production assistant and said my skill set really aligned with what they needed. And so I applied and then I got the job. And it was such an incredible decision because I was able to start my career on Skydance's first ever movie called Luck. And it was released a couple years ago on Apple TV. And I was placed in the art department and remember being super terrified on my first day. I was meeting and working with people who worked on some of my favorite movies, and I had imposter syndrome. But once I started to learn what my job would be, it felt like it was the perfect role for me. And like I said, I started in the art department and worked with the production designer to schedule our different artists to create various assets in the movie. So this ranges anywhere from characters to set design to props. And in animation, we designed literally everything down to pencils. So I had to figure out what all of the assets were in each sequence and make sure they were all designed. And then as we moved along, I got to work a lot in the lighting, animation, and effects departments and run reviews with the director and send the notes back to the animators who were working on those shots. And it was a cycle from there. And then once the art department started to slow down, I transitioned into a role called coordinator in the office of the director and producer, which is a fancy way of saying executive assistant. And I was in charge of both the director and producer's calendars. And so I would receive requests from all the other departments and had to come up with the weekly schedule and find a way to fit in everyone's needs. And I also booked a ton of travel and press since we were super close to the release date of the movie. And they were two very different roles on this project, but they were each so cool and taught me very different skills. And then I got to work on a movie that hasn't been released yet called Ray Gun. And I got to work with one of my heroes, Brad Bird, who directed The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and The Iron Giant. And I was placed back in the art department as a production coordinator this time. But I was on the movie at the beginning of the production instead of at the end. So it was a super different role. I had to help figure out the schedule to design all of the bigger assets like main characters and sets, while on Luck, those were already designed because I came in so late. And it was such an awesome experience to get to be in the weeds of both ends of production in the art department. And then I got moved on to Rich Moore's project, which was still in development at the time. And Rich was another one of my heroes. He directed Wreck-It Ralph and Zootopia. And I joined as a coordinator, and I was actually the only production support at the time. So I dealt with all departments, but none of them were super busy yet. So it was doable. And the first thing I did was help get a pitch deck ready to pitch to the studio. And then once that was approved, the department started to grow and we needed more production support. And I ended up in the story department on this project, which was a brand new department for me. And the head of story and I got along super well. So we decided that it was best for me to try something new rather than stay in the art department for a whole other movie. And as our production grew and we began staffing up, I ended up getting promoted to production supervisor, which meant I was in charge of planning the entire department's schedule, which was definitely a huge responsibility. And now I manage a team of about 10 artists, and I also trained a production assistant through her transition into becoming a production coordinator. And, it's my responsibility to know the strengths of each storyboard artist and give them scenes that I know they'll do well with. And I have to plan out their assignments down to the day in between screening cycles, which usually happen around every 4 months. And so if I get into a little bit of my day to day, my day looks like this, which is schedules, this, lots of emails, and this, crazy calendars. So I am in constant communication with the supervisors from other departments, sharing and receiving information, creating schedules for each screening, but also for the production as a whole, and figuring out the weekly meeting schedule for my department. It's a very collaborative and social job. And I meet with the other production support a lot to discuss where we're going on our schedule and whether anything needs change. Change has become my best friend, and as plans typically change every minute of every day, um, you got to get used to it. Just when you think things are going according to plan, this happens, and then you are back to this scheduling. But another cool part of my day is that it also looks like this. I get to run the room when we do our story reviews, which is super cool. We typically have one a week per artist, and that's when the movie starts coming to life for the first time. I pinch myself every day because I get to do this for work. It is so inspiring seeing all the talent around me day after day. And then once the storyboards are approved, we send them over to our editorial department and get to see them strung together in the form of a sequence. And while some people think production is only technical, I'm here to prove everyone wrong and say it's extremely creative too. Sure, we may not be the artist creating the physical artwork, but we have to be creative in the sense of problem solving and always need to think outside of the box and figure out how to make deadlines work. So, what is production management anyway? It's the process of planning, organizing, and controlling the resources and activities needed to transform raw materials into finished goods efficiently and effectively. And what does that have to do with animation? In animation, it is the process of organizing an idea that transforms into a finished animated movie. And it sounds easy enough, but it isn't. It's basically how you turn this drawing into this fully complete animated sequence. Why it matters? There are so many moving parts to making an animated film, and typically it's broken up by departments, and each department does a very specific thing. So I'll explain more about the different departments on the next few slides, but in order to make a movie, all the departments need to work in tandem while also hitting all of their individual deadlines to make sure the movie gets completed in time. And everyone needs to be in communication with each other at all times, and that can get super difficult. So, a big part of our job is to streamline communication and make information accessible to the other teams at any given time. So, now this is going to be the first interactive little quiz. And if you could either pull your phones out or computers and go to menti.com, you can use this little code and type in your answers, and they should start to show up on this screen. So the first question is, what are the different departments in animation? I'll give a couple minutes for people to join. Let's see. Cool. Yeah, so there's a lot of storyboard, animation, pre-production, CFX, that's one. Visual development, that's another good one. Story and edit, yes. texture, that's definitely one. Editorial. Yeah, these are all great. I will go ahead and get into it. So the first one we have is writing. And this is usually a super small department and consists of 1 or 2 writers and then 1 person in production support. And the role of the production support is to keep track of all the different versions of scripts and distribute them to the different departments once those are approved. And from there, art will design assets based on which characters, environments, and props are in a scene, while story will take it and turn it into storyboards that editorial will use as a roadmap to edit to. And I think one of the coolest parts of being in production management and writing is that they track the records as well. So we do something called scratch, which is temporary dialogue that we use in the screenings. Oftentimes it's just like people at the studio or on your productions. And then once we record our real talent, the script coordinator will help the director keep track of all the different lines we record. And they often record multiple different takes, and the coordinator will take notes on which ones the director liked and so on. So that one's really fun. And then we have story, which is my department that I'm currently working in. And this is where the words turn into visuals. So there's a team of storyboard artists who figure out composition, beats, staging, and so on in a 2D black and white format that those individual drawings get sent to editorial and strung together in a playable format. So it's essentially the animation before the animation. And it makes it so that we're easily able to change different aspects of the movie before doing it in a 3D space, because then it gets a little more difficult. And the production support in this department deals with the overall schedule for the movie on a screening and production timeline. So typically we'll have a few screenings where those kind of act as a checkpoint to make sure we're going in the right direction. And then we also have a production timeline, which is when we need to send specific scenes and shots into animation. So we work closely with the editorial team to make sure the deliverables arrive on time and need to make sure we are following both of those schedules at once. And then we have the editorial team, which is where the whole pie is made. Almost all the departments deal with editorial, as it is the central hub in animation. And this is where all the pieces come together to be made into a playable format. Storyboards, animation, voice recordings, you name it, it goes through editorial. And production support in this department deals with the scheduling of the editors as well as the flow of material to and from almost all the departments, but specifically editorial. And then we get into visual development, which is essentially all of the pre-production design. It's where characters, environments, props, vehicles, and whatever else you need are created. And this is typically a huge department and needs several different types of production support. This includes making schedules, making sure the artists are on track, and knowing who's doing what at all times. And then they're also responsible for delivering all of these assets to the people who are going to build them in the 3D space. And sometimes production support has to help facilitate when those come back to the visual development side, just to make sure they're going in the right direction. And then we have animation, which is just a huge department that has many different departments within it. I saw someone wrote textures in one of the slides. That's part of animation. There's layout, rigging, animation itself, surfacing, lighting, visual effects, simulation, modeling. The list goes on and on. But this is where the project comes to life. And there are endless departments, like I said, within this umbrella, and each of them needs its own kind of production support. So as you can see, there are so many roles that one could have in a production. And now I have another survey on what are the different roles and titles you could have in production management. So if people want to type in some answers. Yep. Yeah, we don't have any line producers in our studio, but I'm not sure if that's the same for all studios in animation. We usually have like a regular producer and an associate producer. So I don't know. Um, yeah, these are all great. Co-producer for sure. Sometimes we need more than one. Executive producer, we do have that, but that is actually typically above a production level. So I actually don't really talk about that role in this presentation. Cool. All right, I will get into it. So this is typically the basic hierarchy of roles in production management on one specific movie at a time. And typically, the first role is a production assistant. There are tons of them, and they are usually in each department, same with a production coordinator. And then when we move up to production supervisors, there's usually one per department. Sometimes a supervisor can span two different departments. And then we move up to manager, and those become more general. And then we have the associate producer and producer. And not all movies have both. Just some of them have associate producers. And so production assistants are typically the starting role in animation production management. It's what I started at Skydance, or how I started at Skydance. And typically this role involves taking notes, gathering and distributing assets, setting up conference rooms, collecting files on ShotGrid, among many other tasks. The main aspect of this role is to learn more about the pipeline by getting your hands dirty. And I learned so much just by jumping right in. And it's super different from what you would typically think a PA role is. Like when people are talking about live action, like a PA is seen as someone who just gets coffee for people. And while sure, you do still have to get coffee sometimes, PAs play like a super integral role in production itself, which is really cool. And then typically you move from PA to a production coordinator, and they have all the same responsibilities as a PA with some additional responsibilities. And the main difference between the two is that coordinators tend to have more communication with other teams, and they own a bit more of the work they do and are responsible for keeping track and organizing things. Coordinators should be able to answer questions from other departments, and they also help make sure that the department that they're in is staying on track. And they also will maintain various trackers that their supervisors create, just again, to make sure everyone is staying on track. And then we have production supervisors. And the main difference between supervisors and coordinators is that supervisors are in charge of their certain team as a whole. And with that comes more responsibility to communicate. They're typically in charge of one of the departments I mentioned earlier on. Like, for example, I am the story supervisor, so I only deal with the schedules of the story team. They work directly with other supervisors, department heads, producers, and the director. And we are responsible for training coordinators and production assistants to thrive in our departments. And another main difference is that the supervisors are typically in charge of the schedule. So we build the schedule, and that is both weekly and the overall schedule for the movie as a whole. And then we have the production managers, who are essentially the supervisors of the supervisors. And they supervise the production on a higher level, and typically there's only one of them on the project, one or two. And they will help enforce and make the master schedule of the movie as a whole that the production supervisors will break down and hit the quotas for. Um, and they're responsible for taking the producer's ideas and implementing them. Typically, it's like the liaison between producer and the rest of the production, while associate producers are the liaison between the director and the production. So typically these people are the director's best friends. They work under the main producer and provide assistance and support rather than making final decisions. They can coordinate schedules, facilitate communication, and offer creative input to ensure the project stays on schedule and within budget. And they act as, like I said, the conduit between director and production team. So this person has to have a very tight relationship with the director. And then we have our producer. They make the whole movie happen. They're responsible for creating a schedule that is based on budget. If we have X amount of money and X amount of time, the producer figures out how we accomplish making an entire movie with the resources we have. Some call it math, I call it wizardry. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I love my job. Of course, it can be stressful at times because there's super tight deadlines and just sometimes it can get stressful, but it's also the coolest job in the world. I get to use my strongest skills to help creatives make a movie. And getting to see something transform from an idea to a finished product is incredible. It takes patience, dedication, and hard work, but I also spend every single day at work smiling, laughing, and having fun. I've become best friends with a lot of my coworkers, and the community is so welcoming and special. It's really one of the most collaborative things to do, which is so unique. And it's just so fun. And I know that I'm extremely lucky to have this job. So this is our last little quiz. Oops. Wait. Let's see if this works. Okay, there we go. What skills would you think are important for someone in production management to have? Yes. Magic, aka math, of course. Yeah, all of these are really great. Collaboration is definitely one of the biggest ones. Spellcasting, 100%. You kind of need to be a little bit magical. Awesome, yeah. All right, I will get into it. Oh, there's still some rolling in. Roll with the punches, that is a big one for sure. Putting out fires, yes. Literally, all of these are perfect. So, a few skills to have, and mind you, these are just a few, but some of the bigger ones. You need to have good communication and be detail oriented. Good communication is extremely important in this job because you need to pass information to dozens, if not hundreds of other people at a time. And this ties into being detail oriented. You want to make sure everyone is efficient. So if something gets added to or cut from the movie, you need to tell others. And you also need to be able to communicate timeline and goals efficiently so that your schedules are followed properly. And you need to build trust with your team. The most important relationship you can have is with the director, because once they trust you, they'll be able to lean on you. And same thing with everyone on your team. Like, If you are managing a group of artists, if they can trust you, they can come to you if something on the schedule isn't right or whatever it is. Like, building trust is one of the main parts of this job. You also need to be able to multitask and stay organized. Multitasking is essential. Sometimes you're taking notes and messaging people to answer their questions at the same time. Sometimes you're in a review and changing your schedule based on how it's going on the spot. It's a very fast-paced environment, and sometimes you need to work on multiple tasks at once. And this is why it is so crucial to be organized as well. It'll help you keep track of things and find things quicker. And then other skills to have: scheduling and calendar management. Scheduling and calendar management is crucial. You need to know how much time you need, when you need it, and be able to help others stick to the schedule. With this, you also need to know what you will need to be reviewing, oftentimes weeks in advance. So like, if you kick off a sequence and story, you need to know how long it'll take, when it will be reviewed, and be able to tell the director what we're reviewing in each specific meeting. So, very important. And then willingness to learn new things and adaptive. These are important because it's impossible to go into a job knowing everything you'll need to know. Learning and growing is part of this job, but also every job. I am learning something new every single day, and I embrace what I'm learning and become better at my job just by learning new things. It also helps me be adaptive because I'm able to change how I work based on what I'm learning. And then recommended enthusiasm. You're just going to want to be enthusiastic at work because it makes people want to work with you. It makes the environment fun. And again, it's just so much nicer to work with people who are enthusiastic. And then another thing is ShotGrid, which you may have heard of. A lot of times production will use a software called ShotGrid, Shotgun, Flow Production Tracker, you name it. This program has had that name in the past. It's been named so many things. It is the bane of everyone's existence, but it is also super duper cool. For a nerd like me, I love that it can track every aspect and step of an animated movie on such a specific level. It is limitless. And a big part of the job is to build a ShotGrid page to manage your project. So I would highly recommend doing a basic online training if you've never had experience with ShotGrid before you start a job in production management, just because like you can by no means become an expert just because of the way that every project uses it differently. But if you know how to do the basic navigation, you are in good shape. And so I'm going to end this presentation with a little bit of advice. I wanted to leave room for a lot of questions because I feel like a lot of people will have questions, but never say no to an opportunity, even if you don't think it'll help you towards your goals. I know it's hard not to be disappointed if you don't get the internship you wanted, but you land something else. But any experience is good experience, especially if you're not sure of what you want to do. I'd say some of the random internships I did helped me out the most. Some of them helped me solidify what I wanted to do, while others helped me learn what I did not want to do. And I worked on this documentary about the women's suffrage movement and had the task of finding any images that they didn't already have from various archives around the world. And while it was so cool, I got to see so many images I would have never seen otherwise. On the flip, it was a little too slow for me. So I was just learning that I thrive in a faster paced environment. And I also can't emphasize enough that any opportunities could lead you to the right connection to get you to where you actually want to be. If you perform well, oftentimes people are willing to refer you or even introduce you to other people in their professional circle. More advice: apply for internships as soon as you can. The sooner you start applying, the more experience you could potentially get and put on your resume for when you're ready for a full-time job. Don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn. When I was just starting out, I did virtual coffee with so many different people at the different companies I was interested in. And it's always so valuable to hear what working at a specific place is like to see if you align with what they're looking for. Most people did it when they were first starting out, so they're likely to want to help others who are just starting their career too. Try not to get too nervous before interviews. I know interviewing can be really hard and also nerve-wracking, but I guarantee you, the person interviewing you wants you to succeed just as much as you do. And I will let you in on a little secret. If you are interviewing for a position in animation, the interviewer will be a total nerd. We are all just adult children trying to make cartoons. So, all very friendly. And this last one, don't get too discouraged from not getting a certain internship or job. I know rejection can always be tough, but there is always a reason for things. Like I said earlier, I was rejected countless times before I landed this job. And in retrospect, I don't think I would have loved any of the other jobs as much as the one I actually got. And sometimes you need to know, sometimes when you think you know what you want, it's not actually meant to be. And it can be really tough to break into the animation industry, but I urge everyone to just be themselves and be relentless. Get your name out there, introduce yourself to people in the industry, and become a name that people will not forget. So that is the end of my presentation, and now I have time for questions.
Thanks so much for that amazing presentation, Brooke. I loved going through all of the different animation departments with you and understanding what someone in production management does at each one of those departments.
Yeah, sure. And like I said, it might be different from studio to studio, but I'm just saying what I know.
That's all we can do, right? So we've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A, and I'll start with Nicole, who asked, what advice would you give to people who are interviewing for PA roles?
Okay, so some advice I would give is for sure, if you can, like I said before, do any training on shot grid, that will give you a leg up for sure, because that is something you'll most likely need to know, and it will show the interviewer that you have taken initiative to learn this thing that you need to know. And it's kind of a good way to show that you're willing to learn anything. Like you could say, and be honest, I don't have experience with shot grid, but I know that like you need to know it for this role. And I took the initiative and started learning it myself, but I'm really excited to get my hands on it and figure it out like in a real work environment. So something like that is really really good. Um just talking about any experience, making sure you have an answer for questions like, is there a time in your life where you needed to pivot and make a quick decision? Um, anything with leadership, like, is there a time when you led a specific group to do something? Talking about good communications and examples of when you used good communication, because it's hard to show how good you are at scheduling. It's not like you can just bring up a schedule for people to use. So just making sure you have concrete examples of the different skills that they're looking for is always really good. And reaching out to people at the company, reaching out to the recruiters who work at the company, anything like that is always really good.
Awesome. We have an anonymous attendee who asks, what is some advice you can give someone coming from a non-traditional background that wants to break into animation production? I feel like, Brooke, maybe you could relate to this a bit.
Yeah. Honestly, if you put your enthusiasm for why you want to work in animation forward, I feel like a lot of previous experience can actually apply to production management. That's why I was saying it's kind of a gray area of like, you want to work in animation, but you're not an artist. Like, there's no portfolio for you to show. Anything can really lead you there. So, as long as you're super enthusiastic about why you want to work in animation and want this role, again, I think you could use any experience you've had to explain why you have the skills to be able to be a PA.
Awesome. All right, and we have Rosalind who says, thanks, Brooke. Love the movie Luck and Zootopia. Love your role. How did you get your foot in the door at Skydance? Are many of these jobs in person, remote, a hybrid? Let us know.
So actually, like I mentioned before, I met Allison Mann, who is one of the co-founders of BRIC, and she became my mentor. And so I was kind of talking to her about what I wanted to do, and she was able to introduce me to the recruiter at Skydance, who I had actually previously interviewed with when she was at Illumination at the time. So I already knew of her and had interviewed with her. And so when she had this role pop up, it was kind of like, hey, you should apply for this. And I was like, okay, cool. So that's how I got my foot in the door. But anyone could find a recruiter on LinkedIn and reach out to them and ask for virtual coffee or just ask to do, I think they call them informationals, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other questions. So we were hybrid in the beginning because like when I started work, it was still peak COVID and nobody was in person. So we were fully remote and then we went to hybrid, but now we are transitioning into fully in office. So it's been really cool. Like it's always so funny meeting people online and then when you meet them in person for the first time, you're like, oh my gosh, you're taller than I thought you were, or like whatever it is. It's just really fun to get to see people in person. And I will say it's like just a lot more of a collaborative atmosphere when you're in the studio because you get to be with everyone. People are like taking notes on paper instead of on their computers and drawing things during meetings and saying, oh, hey, like what if instead of this, it's like this? And then like people can just show each other their drawings right there. And it's really, really fun. So, yeah.
Would you say, Brooke, that a lot of these production manager roles are more suited for in studio, in
Yeah.
person than they are remote necessarily?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can definitely do the job remote. It's been done clearly because everyone had to do it at one point, but it's not ideal. Like it is, there's a case to be made for why being in person is so important. It's just like you get to I was talking about the communication and like building trust with people. Like when you're face to face in person, you can get lunch with some of the artists that you're working with and really build those relationships and communities. And it's definitely better to be in person.
Awesome. I'm going to hop around just a bit because I feel like this one question is related. An anonymous attendee asked, I reside on the US East Coast and I'm unable to relocate. What advice would you have for someone in my position who's looking to break into production management that's not based in LA?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of studios that are on the East Coast. I know Nickelodeon has a big studio over there. I'm not 100% sure of the others. I know even Skydance has a branch on the East Coast. I'm just not sure about like what the in-office guidelines are now because everything's changing. It used to be a lot easier when people were all hybrid or remote, but I think as a whole in the animation industry, like the whole industry is kind of starting to try to be in person again. But even if it's like, I know there's just a lot of animation studios that like the bigger studios will partner with to do the actual animation work. And a lot of those are actually in Canada, believe it or not. And I think there are some on the East Coast. So you could go the non-traditional route and still do production management at like an animation house versus at a studio. So just finding like little loopholes like that are good.
Or even if I could also interject too, um, finding production management experience through other industries, like advertising is a big one on the East Coast, namely in New York. Another industry that offers a similar kind of role.
Yeah, gaming, even live action, like could eventually apply. Like with what I was saying, if you just start building your resume however you can, most of the time, like these skills will eventually apply to um, production management. Another really big one is if you could be an executive assistant somewhere, anywhere to anyone, like those skills directly translate to production management with the scheduling and communication and all that stuff. So that's another good one.
Great advice. We've got some technical questions from Lisbeth here. Hi, Brooke. I have some questions and doubts about the PM role, or I might apply for the production department. I'm just starting to study animation, but I'm very interested in the producer role. So I'd like to ask you, number one, and we'll go one by one, Brooke. The first one being related to the production role. During the pre-production stage, who is responsible for organizing the shots before they are assigned to the storyboard or animation teams? Is the organization based on the level of difficulty of each shot? And in that process, how are deadlines determined?
Yes. So basically, everything is determined by writing. So once a scene is written, you'll kind of know like how difficult it would be to make. And when I say difficult, there's many different factors. There's like the amount of time a sequence is. Sometimes they can be a minute, sometimes they can be 7 minutes. You never know. So like if one is 7 minutes, that's definitely more difficult. If there's different like effects like fire, rain, big crowds of people, like the complexity of what's happening in the sequence is also a really big factor. Um, but a lot of the times, like when you're breaking it down from sequence to shots, that will be something that editorial will actually decide, and story. So it just like depends on what is one continuous shot with the camera. Believe it or not, one thing I learned about animation is that there is actually a camera that they use. Like there can be a cinematographer on the movie, which is really interesting because they kind of position the camera into the 3D set and like move it around. So sometimes it's even figured out by them.
Awesome. And a second question from Lisbeth. Does the production manager work with each department, or does each department have its own PM?
So typically there's like one or two, at least on the productions I've ever worked on, there's like one or two production managers. The ones who are in specific departments are supervisors, and like the supervisors and managers work super closely together because the managers oversee the schedule holistically. So it's like they pretty much make the overall deliverable schedule of like we need this sequence by this time and deliver that to all the supervisors, and then it's up to the supervisors to get everything together to be able to deliver that on time. So no, they don't really work super in one department. It's across all of them.
Great. And then last question from Lisbeth. In pre-production, the script is typically broken down into elements like props, scenes, and characters. Beyond those fundamentals, what key factors do you consider in the breakdown to set up the production pipeline effectively? And once that breakdown is complete, do you establish a base data set or tracking system that guides the following departments?
Yeah, definitely. I think um typically, like when we do an asset breakdown like that, like you said, it's broken down into specific like categories of, okay, is this a character? Sometimes it's even broken down like, is it a main character? Is it a secondary character? Or is it just a crowd's character? And then there's stuff in props, like hero props are usually a prop that is called out in the script and someone might interact with, like, oh, this person picks up this book, like that is something that's called out. And then there's just regular props, which don't need to be like modeled as in depth, and those are called out too. So yeah, usually those are all being tracked on shot grid based on what's coming out of the script. And then um in viz dev, sometimes like you knock out more than one at a time. Like if it's a bunch of props, like, oh, you need plants in this room. Like while you're designing the room, you could also be designing props and whatever. But yeah, there is a place in shot grid where you make sure everything that is called out in the script gets created and sent to the modelers.
Great. All right, we've got Sharmisa who asked, do you have any advice for someone with experience on live action film sets who is looking to transition into production management and animation?
I so I don't know, like I think a few of the internships I did are technically live action, but I was never really a PA on a live action set. But like I've said before, I mean most of the stuff applies to like being a PA in animation. And I do think that it's really cool to come from live action and get to see how different the pipeline is, because um like I said, in live action, a bunch of the stuff that you need actually exists in the real world. Like if you're doing set design and helping, like that's where you go around with a list and make sure the physical items are there. But you can similarly do the same thing in animation of like, oh, we know we need this designed, and make sure the designs are there for someone to then design later. So yeah, I think most of the skills could just transfer over to animation as well. It's just not as much like physical work of like getting actual stuff.
Definitely have to highlight those transferable skills.
Yeah.
All right, we have Kevin who says, I teach in Southeast LA. For aspiring creatives and production management students, do you see LA still as a hub of entertainment and a sustainable job market for those looking to break into the industry after high school or college?
I would say yes. I mean, I do think, and I don't know this for certain, but I do think it's still one of the biggest, like, I mean, it's Hollywood, so there are so many jobs that are available, but I do know that they are getting more competitive. So that means just that more, like a bigger volume of people are applying at one point. And so it's just really important to be able to like get your foot in the door anywhere, and just kind of ride along with it, because so many people are interested in working in the industry, animation, live action, like entertainment as a whole, that I do think LA is still like a great place to be, but it is competitive for sure. But I think that's the same anywhere.
All right. And we have Lisbeth who asks, is a demo reel required when applying for a production assistant role, or is it more relevant to creative positions?
Definitely more relevant to creative positions, but if you have a demo reel, like you can totally show it. Sometimes if you do have one of the skills that like skills of an artist, like it gives you a leg up because you know the work that goes into it, and you can kind of like put yourself in the artist's shoes and show this person like, hey, not only do I know how to do this thing that you want to be done, but I'm also like really good at getting people to do this thing that you want to be done. Um, so definitely include it, but you don't have to have it.
And then Brooke, I have one last question for you. I know from your career trajectory, you've leveled up from PA all the way up to production supervisor. Can you give us can you impart any last advice for us and the group here for what was your secret sauce to leveling up? Like what were those key things that you did on the job that really made you stand out?
Sure. I mean, I think, like I said before, relationships are one of the biggest things in this job. Like from the jump, I've always made an effort to get to know the people I'm working with on a little bit of a personal level, just because I feel like it it really allows you to work better with these people when they know that you have their backs. Um, and so I think that was one important thing that I established really early on, is that then everyone started to advocate for me. Um, and, like, I'm not going to sit here and say I never made a mistake, because that is not true. You are going to make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Um, but I think a big part of getting to where I am now is that I was able to admit when I made a mistake, and I really like tried to figure out and learn what it was that I did wrong so that I didn't do it again. Um and just like always going the extra mile of like, okay, I see that this is this person's schedule, like I'm just going to try my own version of it to make sure I really understand what I need to be doing. Um, and so I taught myself how to schedule different things um, early on, and like would show them to supervisors and managers and say like, is this right? Is this what you do too? Can you walk me through how you think about this? Um, so yeah, like just making connections, making sure you really understand the job and go the extra mile to prove that you can do a certain thing. And yeah, just I also feel like I was in the right place at the right time, if that makes sense. Like transitioning from film to film, and I was lucky enough to get into this current production that I'm on really early. So I really got to know the people who were making it, and I got very close with the director. So um, then they all advocated for me too. So it's like, just you never know who's going to help you, and always stay enthusiastic and happy. People can tell if you're not enjoying work. Um, and even if you're not enjoying it in that moment, like just make sure you have a smile on your face, because that alone can get you really far.
Love that. Brooke, I want to thank you again so much for kicking off this year's speaker series with us. Thank you for joining and imparting your wisdom on all of us. And I want to thank everyone who tuned in for listening and for asking your questions. We love engaging with you all. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day. As a reminder, this webinar will be uploaded onto BRIC's YouTube channel next week. So if you wanted to look back on any of Brooke's advice or notes, you have that as a resource. And just as a reminder, you can tune in to our next speaker series event, which will be happening September 23rd. That'll be all about talent management with actually Allison Mann, our co-founder, and who was Brooke's mentor, who she mentored.
Everyone go to that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.